Is Emmanuel Macron about to repeat the same error of David Cameron? It certainly looks familiar when you watch the report that Channel 4 put together last night, which I will play for you in a minute. And it's quite scary to think that the same mistake is going to be made and what impact that will have moving forward. But it almost looks as though France is not looking at the impact of Brexit. Britain is not looking at the impact of Brexit politically, but of course we're living with it, so we are, as citizens, talking about it, even though our politicians are telling us that we're not. And every day we're living with the realities of those awful trade barriers and every other part of life that Brexit is touching. And it's almost as if you want to go over to France and talk to all of the citizens and say, goodness me, don't make the same mistake. And certainly to Emmanuel Macron to play with fire of pushing that situation is dangerous. But equally, Le Pen doesn't want to talk about Brexit. The far right are actually wanting to continue their campaigns and ignoring Brexit, despite the fact that when Brexit happened, Le Pen was celebrating Brexit and had a Union Jack outside her window and was all full of it.
Je crois qu'on a assisté à un événement historique, l'événement le plus important depuis la chute du mur de Berlin. Je pense que le courage du peuple britannique, qui ne s'est pas laissé impressionner, intimider par les menaces, par le chantage, par le mensonge, par le catastrophisme des élites européistes, est une voie à suivre. Depuis 4 ans, je réclame, moi, l'organisation d'un référendum en France pour demander aux Français ce qu'ils pensent de l'Union européenne et s'ils souhaitent en sortir. Eh bien, les Britanniques ont tiré les premiers, en quelque sorte.
We're almost in an inverse situation in that Starmer is there with the Ming vase, not wanting to upset his enemy and not talk about Brexit and win power to do something about Brexit. And then over in France, you've got the far right not wanting to talk about Brexit because they know that now, because of Brexit, most citizens don't want to leave the EU, but they still want to punish the ruling class, as it were, because of the difficulties of the cost of living crisis caused by COVID and the Ukraine war.
I think Emmanuel Macron knows he cannot win and he wants us to try the far right. But you don't try the far right. You don't play with the far right because you know when it comes to power, but you never know when it leaves it.
And sounded monarchical, but he dropped a bombshell.
J'ai décidé de vous redonner le choix de notre avenir parlementaire par le vote. Je dissous donc ce soir l'Assemblée nationale.
Elections in 3 weeks' time, 4 days before we go to the polls in Britain. Now that's a snap election. At the Place de la République, the supporters of the left were in uproar, both about the speed of the campaign and the stakes of the poll. France could end up with a far right-wing prime minister before the summer holiday has even kicked off. To them, but not just to them, it seems as if the future of the Fifth Republic and the political powerhouse of the EU now hangs in the balance. The woman in white, you know her, Marine Le Pen, the leader of the National Rally, unashamedly nationalist and happier than ever last night. So who's the young man on the stage and in the poster? A son? The office intern? A bodyguard? No, it's Jordan Bardella, 28 years old, and if they do well in the elections, France's next prime minister. He is the poster boy of the far right, literally, big on TikTok, and one reason why so many young people voted for this party. So does the future belong to him as prime minister and eventually to her as president? This question will begin to be answered here in this magnificent building. France has been shaken by a political earthquake, but instead of cowering under a hard hat in a defensive crouch, President Macron has mounted the barricades and launched an incredibly brazen gamble to hold the snappiest of snap elections for this building here, the Assembly of France, the Parliament, if you like. Now, if he prevails and manages to clip the wings of the far right, then he will continue for the next 3 years, the remainder of his presidency, as perhaps the undisputed leader of Europe. If he doesn't prevail, then his wings will be clipped. His reform agenda for France will be turned to dust, and his legacy could be to pave the way for his successor, President Marine Le Pen of the far right, something Macron would absolutely hate to see. Off to the Parc des Buttes-Chaumont, a conflicted place. Once the execution grounds of Paris, Napoleon turned this into a green folly. A perfect place to discuss the new ingredient in French politics, feelings, exploited by all sides.
The feelings and the emotions in politics. It's something that we don't really talk about that much. What we see is that lately most of the feelings that were used by the political parties and the politicians in general were feelings as fear and resentment.
Resentment, yeah.
Resentment.
Yeah.
So this is very interesting because this is exactly what Macron is doing. And that's what he did in 2022. He was like, you're scared about what's going to happen because the far right is going to be elected, but I can make sure it's not going to happen. So you're going to vote for me and you won't be fearing the far right. I guess this is what he has in mind, and is like, okay, this is the only reasonable alternative. There is no option. It's either chaos or us.
They may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in them.
The politics cannot find exactly what the French people need.
And what do you need?
What we need? We need some peace.
This battle for the soul of France is being fought by the princes. Gabriel Attal, the current Prime Minister, is a ripe old 35. Macron's protégé, openly gay, but also a policy geek who shuns social media. Putting the stag back into party is Jordan Bardella, the party animal who wants to be Prime Minister and slurs his way through the Marseillaise on TikTok. Anti-immigrant, anti-Brussels, pro-bruised French nostalgia. Guess which one of them is getting all the attention? Well, joining me now here on the Pont Neuf in Paris is Salomé Saquet, a political commentator and author, and Hélène de Lauzun from the European Conservative. Thanks very much to both of you for coming out here. Salomé, let me start with you. We talked a little bit about the youth vote in my piece. It is extraordinary, especially to many people in the UK, that so many young French men and women have flocked to the far right. How do you explain that?
First of all, I would like to nuance it a little bit, because there was a lot of abstention.
Yeah.
Many young people didn't go to vote, almost 60%. So in reality, it's 1 or 2 people out of 10 who voted for the far right. But
60% abstention, yeah.
Still it is huge and very much more than it was before. And I think it is due to several things. First of all, the ability of the far right to manipulate the social medias or to be successful on
we
it.
saw Jordan Bardella using TikTok a lot.
Exactly, especially on TikTok. Second of all, it's the president himself who set up this scenario where the far right is the only opponent. And we saw that with the debate in between Jordan Bardella and the Prime Minister Gabriel Attal, who was not a candidate on the list. And all of this had consequences. And the third thing is that there is a lot of anger in the inside the youth who can't stand Emmanuel Macron anymore, and who felt that the far right was an answer to all their problems.
Hélène, is this gamble going to pay off for Macron, or will it backfire?
I would say it's a dangerous game. In the history of the French Fifth Republic, the choice of a dissolution by the president has always been a dangerous choice. Of course, we as French people, we have in mind the choice made by Jacques Chirac in 1997 to dissolve the National Assembly.
Prime Minister,
and he got a socialist prime minister. So it's dangerous, and I think that President Macron is a very clever man. He's conscious of that and is gambling in a way. And some people say there is a kind of, well, a calculation behind all that. Perhaps it is a way for him to push the far right to the government and to prove their inability to govern the country. And perhaps he is preparing, in fact, the presidential election of 2027. And by saying, well, to the French people, well, you've seen what is it to have a far right government, so please don't make the same mistake a second time.
Right.
But it might be dangerous because perhaps it's going to work or perhaps not. So.
Right. It's interesting actually because there was a lot of criticism for the immigration bill that the president introduced in the winter, using some of the language of the far right already. So there's a sort of normalization of the far right going on in French politics, whether the far right get into power or not.
Well, Emmanuel Macron is the author of this normalization. He used during almost 7 years, he picked up some little things here and there into the far-right program, like the bill for immigration.
But it hasn't worked,
And
right?
then, all of a sudden, he presents himself as the only alternative to the far-right. And he does that. He did that in 2017. He did it again in 2022. He's doing it again in 2024. But this time, it may not work. And as a journalist and a citizen, I'm really worried about this dangerous game he is playing. He's gambling with people's lives.
But other people would see this as an opportunity. This is the opportunity for France to rise again as la gloire de la France, as a strong nation state.
I agree with Salomé that about the fact that Macron is playing all the time, and that's why he's been paid for today with this vote, because you cannot play all the time. And for example, we were mentioning the immigration bill. He played a game by saying, well, we want more firmness, we want to be to control our borders, etc. And he's exactly the same guy who devoided the law of its content just after having passing it by using the weapon of the Constitutional Council. So it's I think we are arriving at the end of at the dead end of this en même temps by Macron.
But the problem also is at the centre. Where's the centre right in all this? They've been completely eviscerated, haven't they? Is there enough of them left, centre right and centre left, to reconstitute and provide a challenge to Marine Le Pen?
They haven't been able to propose a credible alternative because they say, well, we are criticizing Emmanuel Macron, but we don't want to break with him. Okay. So it's inconsistent.
20 seconds, please.
I think Emmanuel Macron knows he cannot win and he wants us to try the far right. Yeah. But you don't try the far right. You don't play with the far right because you know when it comes to power, but you never know when it leaves.
Hélène de Lausanne, thank you very much to both of you. Indeed. Okay, so as the general election campaign gathers pace over there in Britain, are any of the UK's politicians paying attention to what voters are up to on this side of the channel? Well, let's go to our political editor, Gary Gibbon. Gary, what are they paying attention to over here?
What a difference a few years makes. 2019, United Kingdom was actually taking part in the European Parliament elections. We've taken part in every single one until this one. And we had later that same year a Brexit election. And you have to look a long way these days to get a mention of Brexit from any of the main parties. The Lib Dems today had a manifesto launch. Brexit was on the front of the manifesto last time. You have to go nearly 100 pages in to find the section that goes in detail into their policy, which is toned down and pushed off into the distance in terms of joining the EU. All of that has changed because the parties know the voters don't really want to talk about it. You might want to, some people might want to, but you're in a minority if you do. And the parties are targeting certain types of voters in certain types of seats, and they think those voters would be irritated if they, as they might see it, banged on about Brexit. So that issue is not really, you couldn't even say dominating, it's not featuring in this general election. What do those elections you've been reporting on, the European elections, mean for the incoming government? Well, if it was Keir Starmer, he's been very careful to say in public that he doesn't want to go near the single market, the customs union, freedom of movement. Any of those are all sort of red lines for him. Some people are still holding a candle inside the Labour Party and beyond that maybe he would have a secret plan when he got into power, sort of Bank of England independence moment like Gordon Brown, and suddenly he'd start going for a much bigger deal. He's insisting he's not going to do that. He's going to go for a smaller deal. But even in that smaller deal, issues like returns policy on asylum seekers. You can see how the rise of the far right, the sheer attention span that politicians have in the centre of European politics, with so much convulsion happening over there, is challenged. Getting a deal is difficult.
Who could have predicted that we'd end up having our general election at the same time as the French, and how much could change over the next month or so is quite scary. Let's hope that Macron has worked out the correct gamble and that things go the right way, unlike for us in Britain where Brexit went so terribly wrong. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to comment below. Let me know what you think. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe.